let's get started, because it's been a relatively serious week, hasn't it? Or at least the last 24 hours have. Now, of course, where have you been if you haven't seen the Trump-Zelensky blow-up? I hope we've got a little clip here just to refresh your memory if you haven't watched it at all.
Not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
What a phenomenal blow-up. I mean, look, whatever you want to say about that interview, that debate they basically had live on air, there's one thing you can't take away from America, and that is that now, under the Trump administration, there is more transparency and honesty. Whether it should have played out in front of the public and whether you agree with Zelensky or Trump is irrelevant, because tonight I want to talk about how the UK has responded. Now, first of all, the British government have sort of refused to give a line on this. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit more from Starmer in the coming 24 hours. However, leftists online have lost their marbles over it. They have reacted in a way that I could only call an act of national self-harm. We have some tweets here, perhaps to show you, from one of the commentators. This is Dan Hodges. He said, "I don't care about the Chagos. I don't care about a trade deal. And frankly, after the spectacle, I don't care about the special relationship anymore. The invite from the king should be rescinded immediately. It's time to take a proper stand against Trump and his thugs." Well, quite frankly, that's insane. It's ridiculous, isn't it? This is the largest superpower in the world, who has massive amounts of economic prosperity, the biggest military, and has now, the other day, got very friendly relations with our Prime Minister, which we should be thankful for, actually. So, this act of national self-harm, what would they rather have? Well, they'd rather have us rejoin the EU, create an EU army, this corporate institution that acts only behind the scenes. Have a look at how the EU responded last night to some of these. You can see here, tweet after tweet of the same exact line. Be brave, be strong, be fearless. That's not something I would expect from a democratic institution. It's what I'd expect from an authoritarian nightmare. We should never go back to the EU. We should never rejoin that institution and put our country at risk. I hope Keir Starmer does the right thing and backs America in this one.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Yeah, well, Alex, I couldn't agree more. I'm not... A lot of people are saying, hang on, I'm very deeply wedded to the idea of supporting European security and all the rest of it. I do agree with that. I think in a couple of years' time, the economy bounces back in Russia and they build up munitions and are a stronger threat to European security. I get all of that. Of course, Europe needs to be doing more on defence. But I don't think that we need to glorify and almost... he's become like a saint, right? We treat Zelensky on sort of bended knee. I don't understand all of that. I really don't get it.
Do you know, the last time I saw tweets going out like that had exactly the same wording in them was in COVID. When the bot farms and the farmer and all of the names that you would expect sent out thousands, millions of tweets about you must take your vaccine, it's going to save lives or save lives, whatever it was. That's sinister because it means there's this movement against the most powerful man in the world.
It's unironic, isn't it? I mean, the way that Dan Hodges is as an example here, I mean, there's plenty of other people who've done the same thing. He's reacted. It seems petulant, isn't it? Unironically petulant. And they're saying we don't want to support Trump because he's doing all these things. He's speaking it, he's saying, oh, I want to deal this, I want to do that. Well, they're saying the same thing. They want to do this massive act of national self-harm, don't they?
You making this up to be some sort of left-wing plan, right? You mentioned Dan Hodges. He was a columnist for the Mail,
not just
the Telegraph.
Dan's a good example, but there's
described
plenty of others. In
The Spectator as David Cameron's favourite columnist. He's hardly a socialist, right?
I'd hardly say David Cameron is a conservative.
Also, there's no indication of even a whiff of this sentiment that you've talked about amongst any Labour MPs, let alone the cabinet. So for you to say that the left wing is saying this, the left wing is saying that, they're crying out, that is ridiculous. Come on.
But you mean, look, Kai, the reality is that this. Would you agree with some of these arguments that we should stop the trade deal? Get rid of Chagos.
No, of course not.
It is ridiculous, isn't it? And that's the point. I'm saying we've got these massive calls for people saying we've got to drop America as the leader of the free world. We've got to distance ourselves from Donald Trump.
Nobody
we've got to stop
is
him from coming
saying
in.
that.
Well, they are. I just put out a tweet.
You know that. I know that.
I just gave you evidence.
Oh, did you?
I just showed you the tweet on the screen. There's plenty of people calling
some
for
tweets.
Yeah.
The problem, I think the problem is that so much of the reaction, and not just with this, but anything to do with Ukraine, is so emotionally driven. And actually, as I do, and I have consistently, I think it's in the UK's strategic interest to support Ukraine against Russia, to a point. Yes. If you genuinely do care about Ukraine and you care about peace in Europe and you care about the Ukrainian people getting their land back, then I think we need to move away from these sort of two camps where there are only these two emotionally acceptable positions to have, which are either very strictly for or strictly against. And actually, I think that Zelensky put Trump in a very difficult position in that press conference. Everything that happened there should never have happened. Maybe someone from the press team should have literally pulled the plug. But he put them in a difficult position because if America is going to be the neutral arbiter, or at least the even-handed arbiter between Ukraine and Russia, it isn't possible for them to do that if it comes out very firmly on Zelensky's side, as he was effectively asking them to do during that press conference. So he put them in a very difficult position. And I think, actually, if world leaders care about Ukraine and they care about, Zelensky getting what he's asking for, then they ought to speak to him honestly and say, look, if you want America to help you and you need America to help you, you're going to have to go about this in a different way. Because the way the American public, I think, are seeing it at this point is they see him as being insolent and petulant. Now, whether or not that's true is a different debate. But if he wants what he's asking for, he's going to need to contend with that.
But what would you say to someone like Kai who would say, well, can you imagine if America during World War II had got together with Adolf Hitler and said, come on, lads, let's work this out?
I would say it was a ridiculous comparison.
It is.
You do think they're Nazis, though, right?
Or indeed, which part of the UK would you give up if we were invaded tomorrow?
But I wouldn't. I want Ukraine to get back all of its territory.
But it's not going
That's
to.
not going to happen. That's not even on the table.
But it can't be on the table.
The Trump administration has ruled that out. We know that.
But it's not going to be. I mean, the only country that has the weight to support Ukraine against Russia is the United States. And the reality is that even though I would like for Ukraine to have all of its territory back, I have consistently been absolutely unequivocally in favour of Ukraine's right to sovereignty over its own land. You've got to work one step at a time with the things that are possible and are on the table. And the reality is actually that this over-emotional response on all sides isn't going to get to that the conclusion that almost everybody wants.
It makes me laugh, by the way, that Europe are like, we'll be the new America. Please, you couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag.
They couldn't even agree on a peace deal arrangement. I mean, for goodness sake, the EU is a joke, and that's what these people are advocating for. They're advocating for us to go closer to the European Union. It's got no innovation, no economic growth, that is clearly incoherent.
Well, this is the wedge issue for that, isn't it? It surely is. But I think if you watch that interview from start to finish, it was going fine until Zelensky said to the American people on air that you two are going to have your problems, just not yet, they're coming. And that was when Trump saw red, because he doesn't want the American people to think that they might be heading for trouble somewhere. He wants them to think that it's rosy.
But it's also diplomatically idiotic.
Because I have thought that myself over the last few years. Where is his gratitude? You know, he comes to Britain and asks for more money. Well, actually, we're up a certain creek without a paddle.
Well, I think Zelensky thinks he's doing us a favour fighting this war. And I am, as whilst I can totally and I want Ukraine to win this war, I want to say that unequivocally. However, it is important when we're giving billions and billions, trillions perhaps in total of our hard-earned cash to Ukraine, that there is gratitude alongside that. The reality is that a lot of these people who are advocating for the extension of this war inevitably want Ukraine to take their land back, and I understand that. But even today, a poll came out, and over 70% of Ukrainian people want the war to end.
Well, can I ask, because Leslie's written in and says, Darren, if I was any more right-wing, I would fall off the edge, and I want a peace deal. But the way Vance and those journalists humiliated Zelensky over the suit, acting like playground bullies, taunting a kid. I actually disagree with Leslie, because I think actually there is something to be said about him looking like he's cosplaying.
But I said this to you and you disagreed with me. I think that bit was completely unnecessary and was nasty.
Yeah.
Well, if you turn up,
I actually agree with
the American taxpayer.
I think both can be true. I think that it's actually, Churchill wore a suit throughout the war. There's no excuse to not dress appropriately just because you're fighting a war. He's not there in military fatigues. He's there in a t-shirt and normal trousers. But at the same time, Renee is right that this is not the way that you conduct yourself diplomatically at a press conference in public. It's not.
Okay, well.